3 ordinary rest stops, 3 nights, 3 encounters that didn't make sense, and after the first one, I couldn't stop watching the rearview mirror for the rest of my trip. I remember thinking as I drove that night that rest areas were the one civilized thing left on a highway at 2 in the morning, a place to stretch, to pee, to pretend you were okay to keep going. I was wrong, and I learned how fast ordinary becomes eerie when you're alone, when the lights hum, and when someone else shows up where they shouldn't. Story 1. The Midnight Rest, Stop and the Muddy Footprints. I was in my 20s, pulling an all-nighter at work, and then driving across state lines to see my girlfriend. I'd been awake long enough that the highway had turned into a treadmill of painted lines and low-sodium coffee. The dashboard clock read something like 1:58 a.m., close enough to 2 for my tired brain, and my eyes kept dragging to the sides of the road. 2 miles to the next rest area, the sign said. Salvation. 2 miles felt like a promise. When I turned into the lot, there was only one other car, an old sedan parked under a sodium lamp that made everything look too yellow. My car's radio was off. The air smelled like wet asphalt and the stale coffee I'd been nursing. I remember thinking, okay, quick stop, stretch legs, maybe wash my face, then go. I walked toward the bathroom building and noticed the men's room door was shut and locked from the inside. I assumed someone was in there and waited a beat. No movement. The lights inside the vestibule were on, but the men's door kept its quiet secrecy. A man came out of the ladies' side a moment later, and I heard a voice, female, muttering something about someone banging on the door. It was a small, ordinary exchange, until it wasn't. The men's door didn't stay closed because the stall was occupied in a normal way. It was closed because someone had forced it, or propped it, or otherwise made it impossible to use. I only know what I saw next. The women came out, snapped her bag shut, and left. I had no choice. I hadn't guessed I'd wait that long, and my bladder was not going to be patient. I slipped into the women's bathroom door. That's the detail people always pick at. Why would a guy use the women's room? I tell it straight. I was tired, relieved to be there, and embarrassed. In broad daylight, I probably would have walked back to my car and called someone. At 2 in the morning, with my eyes sandpapered shut, it was the shortest route to getting back on the road. Inside, the women's bathroom was a box of fluorescent light, and the regular smells, soap, a faint industrial cleaner, the lingering perfume from someone who'd been there earlier. I was halfway through washing my hands when the first knock sounded on the other side of the women's door. Hard, deliberate, the kind of knocking that isn't asking for permission but announcing presence. I froze. At first I chalked it up to someone impatient outside, but the knocking kept coming harder. That prickly little alarm you get when something is off crawled across my arms. I remember the metal of the sink under my palms felt cold, and the overhead buzz seemed louder. Whoever was knocking used the knuckles of the hand again and again. The sound traveled across tile. For a second I thought about ignoring it, about stepping out and telling whoever it was to wait. The thought felt small and stupid. When the door swung open, it wasn't the person who'd been knocking. A different man, shorter than the shadow that the knocking suggested, poked his head in, apologetic, like he'd been looking for the women's vending machine. He muttered something about the men's room being locked and left. I watched him go and felt that I should go too, hurry back to my car and forget this stupid late-night detour. But then I looked down. On the floor, muddy footprints trailed like a map. Not many, a set of prints that started at the stall area and led straight to the women's door, and then, as if whoever had been there had gone out after me, toward the parking lot. The prints were fresh and clumpy, dark against the pale tile. They made a path that didn't add up. How did someone leave a muddy trail to the women's door without stepping back to the doorway and out? Why were they so precise? I dried my hands on the paper towel, turned, and stepped toward the exit. At the threshold, I saw that the men's door stood slightly ajar. The latch wasn't broken, but the door, My, reasoning said, had been propped open from the inside and then shut quickly. There was a scuff on the jamb, and the edge of the door had dried mud at the bottom, the same claggy texture as the footprints. Back outside, the other car had moved, parked closer to mine, now idling just a few spots over. A shadow of a person sat behind its wheel. My heart kicked. I don't do well with unknown vehicles near mine at night. You learn to notice details, whether the driver's head is down, whether there's a silhouette, the way a car breathes when it idles. That night, the car looked occupied. I considered getting back in and driving away. I really did. I stood there for a second too long, not because I wanted to be brave, but because my legs decided to betray me. Suddenly heavy, suddenly slow. I told myself a dozen times to go. When I reached for my keys, someone else slipped through the door of the men's room beside me and locked it, probably to fix whatever had been wrong inside. I heard the click. It sounded normal. It sounded final. Then the sound that made my stomach fall out of my chest. Someone moving quickly in the men's room, the scrape of shoes on tile, the sound right next to the partition wall, close enough that I could hear it without it sounding distant, the sound of someone standing in the stall next to whatever stall I would have used. Their shoes were heavy. There was a kind of shuffling, like someone unsure if they were supposed to be there. The way they breathed, broad and slow, was another detail that burned in. I remember thinking, with that slow-motion clarity we get in moments of alarm, that the man could see the thin line above the stall, could see my shadow, could know I was there. But then a stranger leaned in against the stall's latch, an extra set of footsteps, as if to close my options in. At that point I did whatever people do when ordinary choices vanish. I ran. I didn't use the front door. I kicked open the men's stall and pushed through the line of the sinks. I remember the cold splash of a faucet and the sound of water for an instant, the smell of hand soap mixing with adrenaline. Nobody stopped me. Outside, the light seemed too bright, or maybe it was that my pupils hadn't had time to adjust. There, across the small courtyard of the building, the parking lot looked like one wrong step away. I reached my car and fumbled with my keys. My hands shook so badly that I almost dropped them. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a man break from the shadows near the men's door and run, full sprint, toward the far side of the lot. He wore a green hoodie. It was pulled up, obscuring his face in shadow, but I saw the long, loping stride and the way the hood flapped. He was tall. He moved like someone used to being outside at night, like he knew how to cover ground fast. He leapt into the sedan that had been parked nearby. The driver's side door slammed. I locked my own doors by reflex and gunned my engine until the tires bit. I left like I was being chased, because in some way I was. I didn't look back for a long time. For the rest of the drive, my headlights cut across a nocturnal orange world of truck grills and road reflectors. But even with that motion, it felt like the other car, those headlights, the navy blue Chevy that I swear I saw at one point, was tailing me in my peripheral vision. Sometimes I thought I saw it in the distance, then it would dip behind a semi and reappear. Other times I would catch the flash of those headlights in the rearview mirror, and like a needle, anxiety would spike. I never saw the green hoodie again, or the man inside it, and I never knew what he wanted. For all I know, the whole thing had been some drunk's bad joke. But the footprints, the way the men's door had been propped, the lock clicking, those were real. That night stuck with me because nothing made sense. After that, I developed a ritual I couldn't shake. Before shutting off my car, I took a long look around the lot. If there was a second car, if someone was lounging in a seat with the engine warm, my hands would go to the wheel and I would leave. It felt small, maybe overcautious, until you realize sometimes the small things keep you safe. I never reported it. Not because I didn't think about it, plenty of times I considered phoning the police from a safe distance, but because there wasn't a crime scene, no physical evidence beyond some footprints, and no one to give a clear description who wasn't me. And part of me, At the time, didn't want the conversation that follows, the uncomfortable questions, the "why would you?" I didn't want to be the guy who'd almost been a statistic. I just wanted to put the night behind me and keep driving. Sometimes I wonder, with the same dull ache you get when you wake in the dark at 3 a.m., what he thought he was doing there. Was he waiting for someone? Was he setting something up? Did he think I was easier to catch because I was on my own? I have no answers. I only have the memory of the footprints and the hoodie, and the way the night suddenly felt small and full of possible threats. If that first story gives you the chills, and you want more like it, hit like and subscribe. Story 2. The Vanishing Old Man and the Dog. That knew we were on a family trip that should have been boring. Miles of open road, the girls asleep in the back seat, my wife curled with a small blanket, and Bilbo, our lab mix, sprawled between the seats like he owned the middle of the world. We had spread our lives across the car, snacks crumpled in the cup holders, an audiobook playing quietly so the girls wouldn't wake fully. And we were doing the kind of highway miles that make you feel like your life is both transient and permanent at the same time. It was just after 3 a.m. when the rest stop soon sign flicked past. We'd been driving for hours. I'd promised one more stop. In hindsight, fair warning, I had actually forgotten to use the bathroom before we left the last time. I tried to play it off, joked about the dad blunder, and rolled out of the driver's seat with that half laugh that's not really a laugh. The rest area was one of those small, older facilities with a low brick building and a single row of benches under a weak light. There were almost no cars, maybe one truck in the distance, and for a second the place felt like a lullaby of distant engines and insects. Bilbo hopped off the seat and padded over the gravel, sniffing the air like he could map every scent back to its source. The girls shuffled toward the vending machines in that sleepy way kids do when they're half awake and full of candy cravings. I walked toward the bathroom first because that was the point, and because for some reason my bladder finally remembered its job. There was a man sitting on a bench outside the entrances, bald, older, his posture oddly straight for the hour. He wore a coat that looked older than the bench, and his hands sat folded on his knees in a way that made me uncomfortable. He didn't look homeless in any obvious way. He just looked like someone who didn't belong in the modern pattern of late-night rest stops. He had the kind of face that seemed familiar but not specific, as if he'd been lifted from an old photograph. The building smelled wrong when I stepped inside. It wasn't the normal mix of soap and bleach. There was an electrical tang, like something had arc-ed recently, and a faint metallic note under it. The lights flickered on and off once, then stayed. Inside the stall, the tile was cooler than outside, and the sound of the traveling audiobook faded so that I could only hear my own breathing. Halfway through, the lights went out completely. The darkness wasn't total. There was a soft halo from the emergency exit sign and a sliver of light under the door, but I remember the immediate animal-level panic of people who suddenly can't see. I froze. My hands were wet, and the cold soap under my nails felt very real. In the dark, I heard a sound just outside the door, heavy, shallow breathing. It hummed against the frame like someone leaning into the room, listening. "Hello?" I said, "because you always say something in the dark to anchor yourself." No answer. The breathing kept pace, steady and not quite human slow. For a half-second I thought maybe it was the guy on the bench outside. Maybe he'd gotten up and come to use the restroom. The rational part of my brain kept feeding me possible, boring explanations. The other part, the part that pays attention to dogs, felt that prickle of wrong. I finished as fast as I could and pushed the stall door open, expecting a human silhouette, a headlamp, a janitor, an electrician. Instead, the sink area looked deserted. The hand dryer clicked once like a throat clearing, then nothing. I stepped forward, and noticed that the mirror above the sinks had that smear of condensation so common in bathrooms. But there was something in the reflection that made my breath leave me. At first I couldn't place it because the room's back was dark, and the old man outside should have been visible through the door glass, if he was still there. But then, clear as if someone had stepped out of the wall, he was right behind me in the mirror. The same bald dome, the same old-fashioned coat, a face that had an expression that didn't change the way most faces do in the light. His eyes were blank right at the moment our reflections met, and a voice like a dry hinge said, "It's good to see you again." Time behaves weird when you look at something you don't expect. The sound of the vending machine in the entry hall had been a distant clink, someone dropping a coin, and now it seemed closer, like a clock. The dog, who had been calm and waggy, began to whine in a way that pulled at my insides. Bilbo pressed himself against my leg from the other side of the door, nails scraping on the linoleum, whining urgently. He knew something before I did, the way dogs do. I spun around in the actual room. The bathroom was empty. The bench outside was lit by that weak sodium lamp, and the man was gone. I ran to the door and pushed it open, expecting to see him on the sidewalk or on the gravel where his footprints might be, but there was nothing. No car, no figure leaving. The lot was empty except for the truck far off in the distance. No footprints, no coat left behind on a bench, nothing that could explain what I'd seen in the mirror. The girls remained asleep in the car. My wife looked at me with that questioning look, half asleep but clearly alarmed. I tried to find the words that would make this ordinary. Maybe I saw double. Maybe the light played tricks. Maybe the smell had made me dizzy. But Bilbo wouldn't relax. He paced, refusing to get back in, his body low and his tail tucked. He stared at the spot where the man had been, then at the entrance of the bathroom, his ears twitching. Dogs know things sometimes. That instinct isn't sentimental fluff. It's a record of thousands of years, noticing the wrongness adults are trained to ignore. We left the rest area quickly. On the ride away, my wife asked if I was sure I hadn't been dreaming, if stress at work had finally caught up to me. I told her I'll never be certain. I told her that I saw the man in the mirror. I told her Bilbo had gone neurotic. She put a hand on my knee and squeezed, the kind of squeeze that tries to make things acceptable again. What I can't explain, and this is the honest truth, is that as we drove away, I kept scanning for a vehicle that might match the man's. There was none. No signs that he had been there. No footprints. It was as if the act of looking had made him not exist in a way that left me more unsettled than any evidence would have. If someone's presence only appears to you and leaves behind nothing, what do you do with that? The memory that clings is not the man's words. It's the way Bilbo behaved after, pacing in the back seat, refusing to lie down. It's the way my wife kept glancing at the rearview mirror and then away, as if she couldn't decide whether the world behind us was as solid as the road ahead. Even now, when I close my eyes, I go back to that mirror where his face hovered like an afterimage. He said something that night that felt like both recognition and menace, and I have no idea what he meant by it. It's good to see you again. Did we know him? Did he know me? Was this a trick, an old joke, something else entirely? I don't have answers. I don't tell the story to freak people out. I tell it because it's a caution about the small things that change everything. The smell that is off, a dog's sudden unease, a man who appears in a mirror and disappears from a scene. That rest stop looked harmless until it didn't. You can plan and pack and buckle your kids in tightly and still have an ordinary night turn odd in a way you can't name. Sometimes there are no confrontations, no chase scenes, just a quiet vanishing that haunts you in the daylight. For the rest of that trip, my wife kept Bilbo in her lap during stops, and I sat with the car idling, doors locked and the girls sleeping in their car seats. The image of the bald man kept cycling in my head, particularly his clothes. Odd for the modern world, like they'd come from another decade, which made me wonder if his presence was a personal holdover of some sort. But I told myself to stop filling in blanks, that it's better to live with the rude mystery than invent an explanation that gets darker than the truth. That should have been the end of it. An odd night, a story for the Christmas table in a few years when everyone laughed. But there are threads in life that don't let go, and this was one. On our way home, I kept waiting to see that same sober silhouette on the side of the road, or for Bilbo to react to a radio frequency like he'd done that night. Nothing happened, but every time we slowed for an exit, I felt that little internal alarm trip. It doesn't go away easily. I could stop here and let the memory sit like a pebble in my shoe, annoying, a nuisance. Instead, there are other stories. For me, the rest area stopped being a neutral place. It's a place you check twice, one you treat with a little more suspicion than before. And if you thought that was the strangest thing I'd seen on the road, there's a third story that pushed the idea of stranger into something colder. We were in lockdown, and I wasn't meeting anyone in a parking lot on a whim. But that doesn't mean people stop trying to meet. The weird part. Sometimes the worst setups come from the most familiar places. An app, a smiling face on the screen, a voice that seems to fit what you've been missing. I thought I was being careful. I thought I had thought of every contingency. I was wrong. It started as almost every modern romance does now, with a message notification blinking at a bad hour and a profile that seemed too tailored. She called herself Bianca. Her pictures were casual, coffee cups, a strand of hair across her face, a smile that wasn't full on but close enough. We talked for a while before even agreeing to video. She worked nights, she said. So did I. She liked the same obscure bands I did. There was a funny rhythm to our back and forth that made me feel seen in the small, important ways that dating apps occasionally deliver. We FaceTimed once, twice. Her voice matched her photos. Her laugh sounded like a person I could be in a small movie with. We talked about meeting, and she suggested something that, on paper, made sense, a neutral public place where she could leave town in a few hours and wanted to meet briefly before she drove off. It was a rest stop. She said she'd be behind the building, that it was private enough to talk, and that she'd be wearing a red scarf so I'd recognize her. I remember thinking, of course she'd pick a rest stop. Nobody suspects two people meeting under a strip of fluorescent light and a vending machine. I told myself I was being practical. I parked where you park when you're meeting someone you don't know. Headlights off for a minute to make sure they can find you. Engine on, slightly angled. The rest stop was nearly empty the night I went. It had that harmless feeling. People come and go at rest areas. It's a place of stopping. I called, and she answered, her voice like she'd been waiting. "I'm right behind the building," she said. "You can't see the back from the parking lot. I'll come around." She gave me a minute, and I watched the door of the rest stop building. There was no obvious path to circle behind. It was all concrete and a locked service door that you'd need some kind of key to open. I stood where I was, phone in hand, for a few minutes. That's when the ringtone came from the corner of the lot. The vending machine area. It was faint, the way a phone sounds when it's muffled by a cooler. The screen of my phone flashed a message that looked like it was from her. "Where did you go?" The message came after I heard a small shuffle by the machine, like someone shifting weight on a foot. For a second I thought it was her, leaning out to wave, to make herself known. The vending machine cast a long shadow across the concrete, and behind it something moved. I should have stayed in the car. I should have locked the doors and driven. But the social inertia of meeting someone, believing in the normalcy of a date, that went along with my own sense of loneliness, nudged me forward. I stepped out, keeping the car between me and anyone who might come from behind the building. From the corner of my eye, I saw a tall, skinny figure slip behind the vending machine. He moved like a man slipping behind a piece of furniture on purpose, quick and practiced. I called her again. The voice on the other end had the same cadence as the FaceTime I had had days earlier. She sounded confused. "Where are you?" I'm right here. Do you see me? She sent another photo, her face framed the way you'd do it if you wanted to show exact location, and on it was a woman I recognized, hair up, red scarf visible. The problem was the figure that stepped out from behind the vending machine wasn't a woman. It was a tall, thin man. His shoulders were too broad, his head was a little too low. He pulled a phone from his pocket and held it up like he was doing exactly what the photo had shown, staging a scene. I retreated to my car and locked the doors, then watched him move. I felt my pulse, trying to decide whether to sprint or to sit and be invisible. The man glanced around, then brought his phone to his ear and spoke into it like someone delivering a line. That's when I got another message, this one colder by its text alone. "Where did you go?" I sent a quick reply, asking if he was the person I was supposed to meet, and the phone in the man's hand buzzed. He looked directly at me as if for a second he was surprised to be seen, then smiled in a way that didn't match the person on Bianca's calls. It was a small, knowing thing. I tried calling the number listed under the profile after he moved away, and a string of texts came through, some from Bianca's account, some that later bizarrely didn't match her voice. Later, the police would tell me the number was inactive or spoofed. At the time, I only had the prickling feeling that I had been set up to be the one person standing in the wrong place. "Guess I'll get you next time," a message read. Short, casual, like a joke. It landed like a threat. I remember sitting there, the engine idling, watching a figure vanish the way you watch a dream, slide out from under your fingers. Did they think they could rob me, or worse? I don't want to fill in the gaps with worse images than I know. I called the non-emergency police line, then hung up and called again, because calling felt like doing something. Someone came by eventually, took a statement, looked at the photos, asked the same series of careful, polite questions that you get from people doing their job. They couldn't do much without a clear suspect. The number traced back to a dead end. The photos could be faked. The man behind the vending machine was gone. It left me with that detritus of unease you get when you've been duped. The knowledge that an app can give you a face, a voice, a name, the things that make you feel safe, and that someone can use those as bait. But the part of the story that made me quiet afterward wasn't just the baiting. It was how normal the place felt while danger was present. Bright lights, the hum of the vending machine, the smell of oil in the lot, the ordinary setting of harm. Ordinary places become the stage for bad things because we let our guard down there, and the scariest part is that the people who set those traps do it in a way that mimics normal human behavior. I drove home and kept replaying the FaceTime clips and the messages, trying to find a mismatch that would tell me why it had happened. I found a dozen small inconsistencies, a background detail not matching in one call, a shadow behind her shoulder in another that suggested someone else had been in the room. But none of those things told me whether those men had planned to rob me, to scare me, or to do something worse. I don't know. All I know is that the rest stop, practically empty and banal, had a shadow at its edge that night, and someone used the shadow to stage something I didn't want to be a part of. And that's where it sits, uneasy and unresolved, a string that keeps tugging. The rest areas were starting to look less like neutral places and more like potential scenes. And with each question about what if, my imagination did the work the facts couldn't. It made me wary in a way I wasn't before. You can imagine a place like that in daylight and think, no problem, but these encounters taught me to treat silence and routine with suspicion, to watch the other cars, to listen to dogs, to notice the shape of footsteps through mud, to pay attention to the small things that mean something is off. Or maybe you won't. Maybe you'll think I'm overcautious. Maybe you'll think all of this reads like paranoid fiction. Maybe that's what I'd have said to someone else before I had the muddy footprints on the tile. For now, that's where my road stories stand. I stopped at a rest area late one night and nearly walked into danger. I pulled my family into a glowing bubble and watched something inexplicable appear in a mirror. I met a face that wasn't the face that answered my calls and felt the edge of something planned. I haven't told you the last of what happened that night with the old man, and there are other details about the Tinder setup that didn't fit neatly. But I'm getting tired of typing, and my hands need to rest, and there are more miles to cover before this ends. I haven't told you the last of what happened that night with the old man, and there are other details about the Tinder setup that didn't fit neatly. But I'm getting tired of typing, and my hands need to rest, and there are more miles to cover before this ends. Still, some things didn't feel finished, not for me. They hung in the corners of ordinary days like a low, persistent hum. After those nights, the world didn't snap back to normal. It rearranged itself around small precautions and small paranoias. The way I checked the backseat twice before climbing in, how my wife would ask if we needed something as we drove past rest areas, the way Bilbo reacted to a distant car and wouldn't settle until we were past it. Those are the traces a night leaves. I kept replaying the mirror scene with the old man. It wasn't the words alone. It's good to see you again, but the shape of the moment. In a mirror, you usually predict the angle of someone standing behind you. This didn't fit the rules of reflection. It felt like a personal glitch in the system, something the night had inserted to make you doubt what you'd relied on. Did my brain stitch together a face from memory and light? Did I glimpse someone who shouldn't have been there, and that absence of proof is the part that twists you up? Maybe. I still think about how Bilbo reacted. Dogs don't memorize coincidences the same way we do. He didn't whine because he'd misread steam lines on a sink. He whined because something about that man registered as wrong, in a way my rationalizations couldn't undo. My wife handled it with a practicality that steadied me. She asked the questions I didn't want to think about. Did we call someone? No. Why not? Because there was no blood, no attack, no clear crime scene to report. You can try to explain this. You'll find that most official systems are designed to document the obvious. The subtle things, a presence in a mirror, a feeling that the world shifted for a minute, they don't file neatly on a form. We spoke about it, tried to pass it into words that made sense, and eventually folded the night into family anecdotes we touched on in bed when we were both too tired to argue anything urgent. That doesn't mean the memory evaporated. It changed how I moved in small ways. I stopped using the quick stop logic. I mentally redrew the map of safe moves. If the lot was empty and a light flickered, I'd keep going. If a car was oddly close to mine with the driver inside, I'd drive to the next exit. There are no guarantees in those choices. They are tiny, awkward bets against the possibility that a normal place has been turned into something else by someone else's intent. The Tinder night left a different kind of residue. There was embarrassment first, shock after that, anger followed later, small and sharp. But mostly there was disbelief that someone would go through the motions of being a woman on a screen just to string a man to an empty corner of a rest stop. The scar tissue from that isn't big. It's a thin film that makes enjoyment of small online flirts harder. I deleted the app and then reinstalled it about 6 months later. You get older, you get lonely in different ways. You tell yourself you've learned. But you also remember the man behind the vending machine. You keep an extra level of scrutiny now, not because you want to be afraid all the time, but because the world taught you something and you listened. What surprised me most was how these small stories collided in other people's heads. I started mentioning the muddy footprints or the mirror figure at family gatherings, and eyes would narrow. They would tell their own short, sharp anecdotes. A cousin who had gaslighted a sense that something was wrong. A co-worker who took a different exit after noticing a lone figure by the rest stop vending machines. The pattern wasn't neat, but the recurrence made the whole idea feel less singular. People tend to normalize the anomaly when they see it repeated. It's comforting in a strange way. If this can happen to others, then maybe I'm not a hysterical narrator of my own life. There is also a stranger kind of humility that comes with not knowing. We like stories that end with answers. We want the police to confirm, the camera to show, the man to be arrested. We want closure. But what we have is the opposite. Tiny sensory data points, ambiguous motives, the sense that a threshold has been crossed and no one recorded it. Those empty endings are louder in the silence they leave behind. Every now and then, I test the edges of that silence. I drive through rest stops with my windows down, just to feel the air, check the benches, watch for the shapes in doorways. Sometimes it's obvious. Families clustered around picnic tables, truckers stretched out on cabs with their keys in the dash, single people texting. Mostly it's empty, mostly it's fine. Because most of the time, rest stops are exactly what they promise. Neutral, safe, boring rectangles in the dark, where you pee and stretch and move on. The problem is the percentage of nights when they are not. The confusing part is the intimacy of those spaces. Bathroom stalls are tiny, vending areas push strangers close together. Cars parked side by side thread a line of bodies that are visible and invisible at once. We trust them because we don't expect someone to turn that trust into a weapon. And that's the lesson these nights left with me. The danger doesn't always come from a mask or an obvious intent. It can come from someone who knows how to mimic normal human behavior exactly well enough to slip into the gaps we leave open. In the weeks after the incidents, I slept poorly. Not every night, but enough. I developed this twitch where I'd check the locks of our house 3 times. I'd get startled by the sound of a car door, then realize it was ours and laugh at myself quietly. My wife would wake and anchor me with a nudge. She got used to my half-awake questions. Do you remember the man? Did we ever see the green hoodie again? Had anyone else reported anything? These were not productive lines of inquiry, but they were the way we talked about a thing we couldn't pin down. Sometimes the mind manufactures illusions of progress. I would look back at a stretch of highway and imagine the navy blue Chevy slipping into an exit far behind me. I would tell myself I had outrun an unspecified danger. That feeling of triumph would last an hour, then fade, replaced by the simple fact that none of it had actually resolved. There was no credit to claim for survival beyond luck, presence, or the fact that I moved when instinct told me to. You can't count luck as a moral achievement. It's just something the universe dispensed in that moment. The other part of the aftermath is how you learn to tell these stories. I tell them more slowly now. I pause at details that matter. The sound of knocking, the scuff of mud, the dog's insistence. People often miss the small stuff when they try to judge danger. They reduce it to, "Why didn't you?" And the why is rarely useful. The better question is what you felt in that second. We remember the sensory metabolism of fear, the cold sink, the scrape of a shoe, the hollow echo from under a vending machine, because it's honest in a way our rationalizations are not. I kept thinking about the idea of liminal spaces, places built for transition and therefore often overlooked. A rest stop exists in the middle of motion. It's a brief suspension. There's an oddness to places designed to be temporary. Rules are softer there. People loosen up. It's why they fit as stages for both the banal and the risky. You can be most yourself in a place where no one expects you to be anything at all. That absence of expectation becomes a kind of camouflage. When friends asked if these experiences had changed me, my answer was a mixture. Yes, changed how I move at night. Yes, changed a few habits. But not fundamentally altered my sense of trust in people. I still believe in kindness. I'm just less ready to accept gestures that bypass the ordinary cues you normally use to measure someone. It's a clumsy, adult version of learning to look both ways. You don't want to live forever in the paused state of what if, but you also don't want to pretend the road never taught you anything. There's an odd humor that sneaks in sometimes. You'll be sitting at a diner at 4 in the morning and find yourself measuring the other patrons as potential threats in the exact way you once measured a motel parking lot. You feel ridiculous, and then you feel grateful for the part of you that notices. We are made for contradiction. We learn from danger without letting it dominate. The trick is to balance the memory of vulnerability with the practice of not letting it shrink your life. After the Tinder thing, I changed my approach to connecting online. That might read like a list of rules, but it's really just a rhythm I adopted. More FaceTime, more questions, actually meeting in places with lots of people. It felt like a hollow victory. The man behind the vending machine had already done his job of reminding me how easily someone can manufacture intimacy on a screen. But it also taught me to insist on time to layer evidence rather than leap. That tests patience, which is good. Patience is often the first line of defense. I want to be careful here because I don't want to sound like I'm giving you a safety manual. I'm not a counselor, and I'm not trying to prescribe a checklist. The point I'm stumbling toward is softer. Pay attention to what doesn't fit. Trust your unease enough to let it be your guide. That doesn't mean you live in a state of constant alert. It means you recognize when something is off and let that recognition have weight. The 3 stories I'm telling you aren't horror scripts with tidy endings. They're small moments that ask you to carry a little more attention on the road. People often ask whether telling these stories is worth it. Am I spreading fear? Possibly. But there's a difference between inciting paranoia and sharing caution. I grew up in a house where risk was a thing to face head-on. The older I get, the more I realize risk is also an information problem. It rewards the person paying attention. The more stories we trade about the odd things on the road, the more we build a mental database that might help someone spot the wrongness before it becomes real harm. Sometimes I get emails or DMs from folks who say, "That happened to me too," or "Thank you for saying this out loud," or "I used to think I was overreacting." Those notes mean more to me than any likes or shares. They are tiny confirmations that these are not isolated crackpot tales, but common, scattered edges of experience. The rest stop is an everyday stage. It will continue to be used for ordinary things, but it will also sometimes host the unexpected. That doesn't mean you lock your life down. It means you let small signals guide larger choices. Slow down to check the lights. Keep your phone on, yes, but keep your head up too. If something reads wrong, a shadow that doesn't belong, a dog that won't put its head down, a knock that doesn't sound like someone asking, you can leave. There's no shame in leaving. I've learned leaving is a skill, one that doesn't get enough credit. Looking back, I think what haunts me is a simple inversion, the idea that the ordinary surfaces for harm. Not terror in the cinematic sense, not the dramatic ambush, just someone moving through the expected motions, knocking, sitting on a bench, sending a message, so that the pattern of normal life makes a cover. That is the thing that lingers. The uncanny way normal behavior can be weaponized by people willing to exploit the small spaces we leave open. The night I saw the muddy footprints, I could still see the clumps of mud in my head for weeks. They were like a breadcrumb trail that told no story. If something becomes memorable, it's often because it resists the shape of explanation. A footprint without an owner is worse than no prints at all, because it demands a narrative and offers none. That blankness is a little like a question mark in your chest. And the old man in the mirror, his face lodged like an after-image when you look at a bright light. It taught me that some things you cannot chase down. Not everything that unsettles you will be explained. Sometimes the only thing you can do is rearrange your life in small ways to make the chance of encountering that particular wrongness again less likely. You can't rewrite the past. You can only steady your present. Those are the practical fragments of what these nights left behind. They are small, perhaps dull, but practical. In the long run, these are the things that add up to a cautious, watchful life, not one defined by fear, but informed by it. So what do you do if you find yourself in a rest stop at 3 in the morning and the men's room door won't open? I won't tell you a checklist to follow. I will tell you what I did and what I wish I'd done faster. I left. I ran to the car. I didn't stand still and justify my hesitance. I didn't yell. I didn't try to be brave on someone else's stage. I trusted the knot in my stomach more than the easy banter in my head that told me I'd overreacted. For me, that was enough. I also recognized how those tiny decisions ripple out. After the mirror, I didn't go back alone to that rest stop for a long time. I stopped telling the story like a joke. I started telling it like a report. The Tinder setup taught me to treat images and quick calls as evidence that needs verification. The green hoodie night taught me to keep my car keys like a lifeline, not an afterthought. There will be people who read these stories and file them under rare or unlikely. They're not wrong. Most of the time, rest stops are safe enough that millions of trips end without incident, but rare isn't zero. If anything, the rare quality is the point that steers me. There are no perfect shields in life. There is only the calculus of small choices. Leave the light on a little longer. Keep the kids buckled when you make stops. Notice the dog who won't settle. Look for the footprints on the tile. Question the comfortable narrative. Every time I tell these stories, even now, there's a small voice that wants to wrap them up tidy. It wants an arrest caption, a mugshot to pin to the tail, a name to attach so the moral is neat. But those tidy endings are often a fiction. The truth frequently arrives messy and unresolved. That unresolved quality can feel unsatisfying, but it's also the honest one. Sometimes the only thing you can turn into a lesson is your own instinct. So here we are, 3 rest stops, 3 nights, 3 experiences that didn't fit any single explanation. There are footprints that began nowhere, a face that appeared in glass and then wasn't there, and a staged call behind a vending machine whose only proof of existence is a thread of messages and your memory of a tall, skinny shape. Each one ended with us driving away. Each one ended with a question. If you stop at a rest area tonight, you'll probably be fine. But if you see something that makes your skin go still, treat it with the seriousness it deserves. Trust what your senses tell you. You don't have to make a heroic choice. Sometimes the bravest thing is the simplest. Put the car in drive and keep going. If any of this resonates, if you've had your own odd rest area story or a late-night encounter that never really made sense, tell it in the comments below. Share what happened to you. These stories matter because they teach us something the news can't always accommodate. How ordinary, slippery moments can shift a life. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There are more stories like this, and hearing each other helps more than you might think. One last thing before I go. Next time you lean against a vending machine or walk past a bench under a weak light, look twice. Not because the road is full of monsters, but because the world is full of people who know how to look. And sometimes the thing that saves you is noticing the way a shadow doesn't quite fit the place it falls.